A South Texas jury has reached a verdict in the murder trial of a Mexican national accused of gunning down an off-duty Border Patrol agent in 2014.
Eyewitness News reporter on the border, Oscar Margain, has been following the case and has the latest from a Brownsville state court.
After 11 days of evidence and testimony, the jury found Gustavo Tijerina Sandoval guilty of capital murder and attempted capital murder.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Gustavo Tijerina Sandoval, guilty of...
It took jurors just over an hour to deliberate and reach the guilty verdict, with 34-year-old Gustavo Tijerina Sandoval standing expressionless.
And they pointed to this individual over here.
The state and defense each had 40 minutes to present their closing arguments. Defense attorneys took turns trying to poke holes in the prosecution's evidence.
They can bring you 40 witnesses to tell you that this bin is orange, but it's not orange.
While the state argued they had the law and the facts on their side, having shown over 300 pieces of evidence.
In his confession, he says, I shot him. I did it. I'm due. I must pay.
The verdict is a culmination of almost 3 years of investigative work and preparation that started the evening of August 3rd, 2014, when Javier Vega Jr., an off-duty Border Patrol agent, was fishing off a canal with his family in rural Santa Monica, Texas. Tijerina Sandoval and his alleged accomplice Ismael Hernandez Vallejo, who has yet to stand trial, drove up to the family to rob them at gunpoint. The situation escalated in a gunfire that left Vega Jr. dead and his father injured. Both Vega Jr.'s parents testified during trial and were notably emotional after learning the jury's decision. The jury is being sequestered until Thursday afternoon, when the sentencing phase is scheduled to begin. Tijerina Sandoval is facing either life in prison or the death penalty. In Brownsville, on the Texas-Mexico border, I'm Oscar Margain reporting.